In the grim early days of World War II in the Pacific Theater, bomber crews faced a harsh reality. If enemy fighters broke through the escort screen, survival came down to overwhelming defensive firepower. For one American bomber, the solution was astonishing. It must carry more firepower than a few fighters combined. What began as a desperate improvisation soon transformed the North American B-25 Mitchell into an airborne gunship unlike anything the war had ever seen. In early 1942, newly built B-25s destined for Europe were diverted to the Pacific, arriving in Australia by April that year. Crews flew these aircraft with minimal training straight into intense combat zones. Standard bombing runs at 10,000 to 12,000 feet placed B-25s directly in the effective range of Japanese flak batteries and Zero interceptors, turning formation raids into deadly missions. Limited fuel capacity in P-40s and P-39s prevented them from escorting B-25s deep into enemy territory, leaving medium bombers to face flak and fighters alone on the critical final leg. Many B-25s were intercepted and crippled 50 to 100 miles from their targets, forcing premature bomb releases or mission aborts, resulting in heavy losses. Desperate for results, pilots began flying below official altitude minimums to evade flak and improve targeting accuracy, contravening doctrine but saving lives. Shifting to low-level tactics brought new dangers. Small arms and light anti-aircraft fire inflicted losses equal to or greater than those suffered on medium-altitude runs. On one April raid over New Guinea, 6 of 18 B-25s were lost, a staggering 30% attrition in a single mission. By mid-1942, B-25s in the Southwest Pacific were still suffering crippling losses to Japanese fighters and flak, with multiple raids losing more than one-third of their aircraft before reaching the target. When General George Kenney assumed command of the 5th Air Force in August 1942, he quickly recognized that adhering to traditional doctrine would mean certain defeat among bomber crews. Major Paul "Pappy Gunn proposed replacing the B-25's bombardier station with a solid nose packed with heavy machine guns. His concept called for up to 8 50-caliber Browning M2 machine guns in the nose alone, supplemented by waist, dorsal, and tail guns, giving the bomber far more forward firepower than standard B-25s. Although Air Force orthodoxy held that bombers were for regular bombing and fighters for strafing, Gunn's design merged the two roles. Many senior officers initially dismissed it as a reckless misuse of a valuable bomber airframe. However, Kenney greenlit the modifications immediately, overruling skeptics and allocating scarce B-25s for conversion in theater. Although this risked precious resources at a time when replacement aircrafts were hard to come by. In low-level anti-shipping attacks, these modified Strafer B-25s would struck at mast height, blasting Japanese ships' bridge areas with concentrated forward fire before releasing bombs, often flying through intense flak and small arms fire. In 1942, many air bases in New Guinea were little more than muddy runways carved out of jungle clearings, with fragile supply lines and a constant need to salvage or improvise parts. The recently arrived B-25C and D models were designed for medium-altitude bombing, not the brutal low-level strafing runs soon demanded of them. Major Pappy Gunn immediately spearheaded the idea of removing the bombardier's glass nose and replacing it with a solid metal housing packed with machine guns. Without factory tooling, Gunn's crews hand-cut aluminum sheets, hammered them into shape, and riveted them together in open-air workshops. The modified noses bristled with 4 to 8 Browning M2 50-caliber heavy machine guns, each firing 750 rounds per minute, creating a deadly wall of lead ahead of the aircraft. Adding heavy guns, ammunition, and support structures shifted the aircraft's center of gravity forward, requiring careful adjustments to avoid dangerous instability in flight. Every test firing was a gamble, and ground crews must be certain that the nose would hold, and that vibrations would not shake critical systems apart mid-flight. On March 1943, a Japanese convoy of 8 troop transports and 4 destroyers, carrying nearly 7,000 soldiers, posed a direct threat to the Allied foothold in New Guinea. This would mark the first combat test for the heavily modified B-25 Strafers. Skip bombing was also an experimental concept. Medium bomber pilots had practiced releasing bombs so low they skipped across the water like stones. Low clouds and rain squalls obscured the convoy, forcing the Allied formations to regroup and reapproach while risking early enemy detection. When they finally struck, the B-25 Strafers roared in at mast-top height, barely 200 to 250 feet above the sea. Their forward-firing 50-caliber machine guns blazed to suppress anti-aircraft fire and disorient Japanese gunners. The concentrated streams of fire from the modified B-25 noses and side mounts shredded ship defenses, disabling gunners and clearing the way for deadly bomb runs. Skip bombs released at extremely low altitudes slammed into the ship hulls just above the waterline, detonating with devastating effect, often breaking vessels in two. Within hours, the Japanese formation collapsed, leaving only 4 destroyers to rescue the survivors. Washington took notice immediately when reports from the Battle of the Bismarck Sea emerged. This convinced USAAF planners and North American aviation executives that the Pacific's improvised B-25 gunships were far more than a one-off success. Building on this momentum, by mid-1943, North American began re-engineering the B-25 from the ground up, drawing directly from Pappy Gunn's field modifications. This effort culminated in the introduction of the B-25G in late 1943. It was the first factory-built gunship featuring a solid metal nose that housed the 75mm M4 cannon alongside multiple 50 caliber. Originally made for tanks, the M4 cannon could punch through ship holes in fortified positions. However, its powerful recoil violently shook the aircraft and limited the firing rate to 1 round every minute. In early 1944, the B-25H followed, replacing the heavy M4 cannon with the lighter T-13E1 and increasing the number of forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns to an astonishing 8, in addition to the flexible mounts on the sides and tail, further amplifying its firepower. By early 1944, the B-25G and B-25H models began arriving in the Southwest Pacific, eliciting both excitement and subdued skepticism among experienced Strafer crews. The lighter T-13E1 cannon still delivered bone-jarring recoil, causing the entire aircraft to shudder violently, with rivets popping and plexiglass panels rattling after repeated firing. Each shot produced a massive muzzle flash and thick smoke that often drifted back into the cockpit, obscuring pilots' forward vision at the most critical moments. Loading was a slow manual process requiring the navigator to stand and wrestle a 15-pound shell into the breech under intense G-forces and enemy fire, which drastically limited the firing rate. Against fast-moving barges or maneuvering ships, the cannon's slow rate of fire proved less effective than the continuous hail of 50 caliber rounds, which could track and shred targets more reliably. Cannon accuracy was also inconsistent. Small evasive moves by enemy craft at low altitude frequently caused shells to miss, wasting precious attack opportunities. Many experienced crews came to prefer the sustained firepower of the 8 or more Browning M250 caliber machine guns, which delivered more tactically useful damage than the one big punch. Mast-top flying left virtually no safety margin, as operating just 20 to 50 feet above water or treetops gave crews only seconds to react. Each strafing run was an all-or-nothing attack, requiring pilots to fly straight into the densest concentrations of enemy defenses with no opportunity for high-altitude evasion. Japanese anti-aircraft positions were often expertly concealed in jungle foliage or embedded along shorelines, enabling point-blank range fire that was devastatingly effective. Low altitude increased the lethality of even small-caliber flak, which could shred control surfaces, puncture fuel tanks, or kill crews instantly. The heavy forward-firing armament and ammunition loads made the B-25 Strafers sluggish in turns and climbs, which became critical vulnerabilities when dodging fire or pursuing targets. Engine hits were almost always fatal at such low altitude, as there was rarely enough height to recover or bail out safely. Following early field successes, production B-25H and late-model B-25J gunships rolled off North American's assembly lines in large numbers, each designed from the outset to deliver maximum forward firepower rather than relying on battlefield improvisation. By early 1944, an arms race among different B-25 units saw standard production models equipped with as many as 14 forward-firing 50 caliber Browning machine guns distributed across nose, cheek, and waist mounts. Some field modifications pushed that number to an unprecedented 18 machine guns, providing firepower comparable to multiple fighters. This potent gunship concept quickly expanded beyond the 5th Air Force in New Guinea, spreading to the 13th Air Force in the Solomons and the 7th Air Force in the Central Pacific. By war's end, the B-25s had evolved from a vulnerable medium bomber into a doctrinal cornerstone of Allied air power.
It proved that a single aircraft could combine the sweeping firepower of multiple fighters, thereby fundamentally redefining the role of the medium bomber in modern warfare. Modified B-25 gunships stood more than just an experimental twist on a familiar aircraft. They also became a turning point in aerial warfare. Thank you for watching, and please support my work by subscribing and purchasing my ebooks. You can find the links in my bio description or by searching for Adrian Langsford on Amazon.